Hi everyone, my name is Holly Kolajacek. I'm the Student Director of Education and Outreach with the ASUO Men's Center. With me are my colleagues Maya and Trevor. And
Hi.
we have a couple of special guests joining us today. So Priya and Teja are both master's students in the Marriage and Family Therapy program here at the University of Oregon, and we're going to be talking about how to have healthy relationships during this time of stay at home and COVID-19. So without further ado, I will pass this on to Priya and Teja.
Thank you so much, Holly, and thank you to the Men's Center and the University of Oregon for having us here. I think that these community collaborations are so important, and especially in these uncertain and unprecedented times as we're all kind of navigating this pandemic together. So thank you for having us. And Teja, if it's okay with you, I was thinking that maybe what we can do today is kind of really do some really nice tips and reminders about some ways to bolster a relationship and to provide some healthy relationship tools to folks. And then maybe I can go over some general reminders, tips, things that are happening. And then maybe I'll pass the baton to you to speak to specifically dating during COVID-19. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm looking
Okay,
forward to it.
perfect. Let's dive into it. So I have my blue light blockers on, so you guys might see, but I have my my notes pulled up here on the side, so I know everything is being reflected. But really, what I just wanted to start off by saying is, wow, I think that as a master's student in the couples and family therapy program who's actively practicing in the community, what I'm noticing, and I think that a lot of people in the field can really comment on, is that relationships are being tested. And it's a tricky time right now for relationships. And then also, just for some framework for this talk, really keeping in mind that there is no one type of relationship. So many different constellations, queer, heterosexual, married, unmarried, people who cohabitate, people who don't, polyamorous constellations. So just want to be mindful that this is applicable kind of tips and information across the board, and really wanting to include all groups and all people in the conversation because it's really important. So I think the first thing, kind of thinking about the framework with people who are in long-term relationships currently, one person or, whatever that relationship may comprise of really can't be the only outlet. And I think that that's something that I'm noticing people are running into right now. And also just normalizing the fact that right now during, COVID-19 and the coronavirus, we're all being tested in one way or another. And if we are not being impacted, then someone we know is being impacted, or, as the ripple effect continues, either financially, maybe through unemployment, challenges related to childcare, homeschooling, online sessions, grief. People are dealing with illness and death and addiction at this time as well, and how all of those pre-existing issues are really being exacerbated. And I know that Teja is going to speak more to this as well in his section. So really just want to make some space that I think the beauty of this is that we're all kind of experiencing this together. And I know that that doesn't make it better necessarily, but it's something that if we can tap into our community and our people and our resources, I think that that can be really helpful. So with all of that, I wanted to share about 5 different tips and little mini sections. And I'll read out kind of the highlights, and then I'll go into each one. So the first one is say I love you. Number 2 is choose your battles. Number 3, I feel like there are a lot of head nods on that. Number 3, do your part. Number 4, be kind to yourself. And number 5, prioritize safety and each other. So these are, of course, the list could go on and on and on, but for today, I think that this is a good place to start. And really just a reminder of how to participate and show up in a healthy way for your partner and your significant other or others. So number one, say I love you. So I feel like this seems so basic and so obvious. And I think that it's even more important now because people are being cooped up with one another. And that can cause a lot of tension, and it can increase a lot of conflict, especially if it was there pre-existing. So in terms of saying I love you, maybe if you and your partner are either not at that stage in your relationship, or sometimes you really don't feel like saying I love you, and that's okay. Right? Maybe don't say that, but because I think the thing is avoiding hurt, avoiding getting hurt. That's what I hear a lot. I don't want to get hurt again, Priya. And, being mindful of that. But if you're unable to come from a place of expressing that love and that affection, that's okay. Maybe trying to focus on the qualities of your partner that bring you joy. I really appreciate when you do the laundry, or wow, you're so consistent with that. Whatever it might be, whatever that might look like, those small compliments. And ultimately what can happen is as you continue to share those kinds of qualities or positive reflections, either something that they're doing right, what are they doing correctly that really adds joy to your life? Because often we really focus on what our partner or person or people are doing wrong, especially since we're all stuck at home right now with the stay-at-home orders. It's easy to fixate on that. We did it before, so it's just amplified now. So trying to really refocus and tailor on the positives is really an important part of this section. And as you get into the rhythm of seeing these positive qualities or positive reflections, the hope and the goal here is that it will elicit a positive response from your partner and really be like this injection of positivity for the partnership and changing that cycle. It's hard. Relationships are hard. It's hard work. No one really said they were easy, but that's okay. We still do them because of, the long list of things that, they fulfill our needs, and maybe these people make us happy, or they do something for us that we obviously appreciate, which is why we might be with them. So really trying to inject positivity into the relationship, and focusing on positive qualities right now for your partner in a time where we might be really falling into those traps to no fault, of our own. I think that that's the thing. Giving ourselves some slack is really important. We're not going to be perfect. That's okay. But trying to be mindful and trying to be kind is really going to help that relationship that might be encountering a lot of conflict, or maybe even a small amount of conflict. It doesn't really matter, but focusing on positive qualities, best qualities, things that they do correctly, and verbally sharing that with them, even if it's obvious, going out of the way to verbally express that through that words of affirmation, love language, can be really helpful at this time. All right, let me take some of my tea. Number 2. This is my favorite one. Choose your battles. Lord, let me tell you. But no, I think that, the thing is, every relationship looks differently. So people who are partnered and not living with each other, that's going to be a different dynamic than people who are living with each other, versus a long distance relationship, versus people who are single currently and dating. So this is, I think, for this specific topic of choosing your battles, it really does apply to all of those, and all of those dynamics. And I feel like in a time where there's so much environmental anxiety and stress floating around due to so many of the shifts in our day-to-day experience of, I think that so much of life has changed. Kind of feels like it's been put on pause in a lot of ways. We're seeing a lot of cancellations, graduations canceled, people are postponing their weddings. So there is this ambiguous grief and kind of strangeness kind of floating out in the environment. So being mindful that more often than not, people will be on pins and needles right now, including your partner, including yourself. And once again, giving yourself that slack that, no two people can be with each other all the time. So how do you create space when that might not be an option right now? So really turning towards the self-care and finding structure and ways to carve out, your own personal time as well is really important. I know that pre-COVID-19, it was probably people in my field were sharing the same sentiments. And that's even more true now, that when people are in close proximities or unable to do things like, maybe take a road trip right now or fly back home to see their family or go to the gym or, attend different community events, go here and there and, get their hair done or go play basketball with their friends. We're not able to have a lot of these outlets that we're used to. So finding those creative ways so that you don't really bubble and boil and then just explode, which we happen to see a lot in the work. I think Teja can attest to that as well. We see a lot of that escalation. So picking and choosing your battles of what is important to communicate, communicating your needs, communicating your boundaries, communicating when you need space is really important. And then also some tips around when you do have that battle, or as I like to say it, conversation, being kind and try not to repeat a point and drill it into the other person, I think is really important. I think a lot of times when we're having these arguments, we feel defeated or escalated because our person isn't hearing us. And that then frustrates us and makes us either raise our voice or act in a different kind of behavior or way, or continue to repeat the thing that we feel like they're not getting. So just trusting yourself that, you have weight in your words have value, and you don't need to repeat yourself. And they can stand on their own. And if they're not being addressed, then you can take a step back and have another conversation with your SO and your loved one. So that's choosing your battles. And I just want to say that, of course, it's always easier said than done, but practice is really important, and relationships take practice too. And it's work. I think that there are tips and ways that you can study and learn about relationships to make them healthier. All right. Do your part. This one is mostly about housework. And I think it's also really realistic. A lot of people in relationships bicker over these small things, which end up becoming bigger things. The laundry, the dishes, unloading the dishes, the bed sheets, the rags, using the wrong towels to clean your bike, whatever it is, right? Those things can definitely, I think, stir the pot. So how do we kind of build a game plan here? How do we, instead of bringing problems to our partner, how do we bring solutions? And taking maybe a business approach, taking, an academic approach to our relationship a little bit, and using some of our internal strategy and resources, because communication takes, I think, technique as well. How do you say something in a kind and compassionate way, in a way that the person you're speaking to is able to receive that and then do what you're asking, kind of thing? So I know it might seem simple, but I find that it's very difficult for at least people who, I work with and some of my clients in the community, to have direct, honest communication. Direct communication about expectations about housework and labor around the home, who takes the dog out on a walk, who feeds your children, who takes care of grandma, whatever the system and the house and the home may look like. I think that that's really important. And I also want to do a plug for, and I want to be mindful to make sure that I give enough space and time for other people as well and presenters. But even this is a more general thing, even for people who are not necessarily in relationships or romantic relationships, but maybe a student who's living with their family during this time, who left college to move back in with their family, and how, their relationships are being tested, and home dynamics. And I think that communicating with the people you live with, even roommates, about a division of labor is really important, so that people's needs are being addressed in a way that it's not taking from you. So if anything, it's going to diminish that stress, diminish that anxiety, and it can be an easy thing. It doesn't need to be difficult, but it can be something so simple as, hey, I'd love to talk about the laundry, or I'd love to talk about who takes out the trash when. And kind of keeping it low stakes, I think, can add to the overall health of a system and relationship or family during this time. Once again, we're seeing things heightened. If you got irritated with your roommates not taking out the trash before this, you're probably going to be heightened that they're not taking out the trash during this. We're all spending a lot more time at home. A lot more time at home. So we want to make sure that, these are the things that aren't stealing our happiness and aren't bugging us. So trying to be mindful and giving it credit, because it does matter. Definitely does matter. And that's a way that you are able to value yourself and honor yourself and your experience and your perspective, because you matter. And your feelings matter, and you're allowed to feel your feelings. And I think that ties in perfectly into number 4, be kind to yourself. I think in relationships, we, I used the word explode before in terms of escalation during those conflicts. And we see it, people express themselves differently and can get snappy or whatever that might look like. And I think that when we react versus respond, those behaviors can be really damaging to relationships, specifically romantic relationships, because you can say something or do something that stems from an unhappiness within yourself. So really, it's that projection, and that doesn't feel good. And probably not for yourself or the person who's on the receiving end. So really taking time to, water yourself and nurture yourself and treat yourself like a temple, or, I like thinking of the analogy of like a beautiful tree, that you have these roots and you're grounded and you have all this fruit, and, but you go through the seasons. And I think that we're in a season right now when we're changing colors, or maybe we're losing leaves, and maybe we're, having flowers bloom. I'm not sure, but I do know that everyone is kind of going through their own transition, and it looks differently for everyone. So making sure that you're watered and fed and rested and doing your self-care, being kind to yourself, journaling, taking time out to even just take a couple quick deep breaths, whether you are about to hop onto a Zoom call with friends, family, work, an employer, a meeting with a boss, in the middle of a fight with a loved one, just taking a couple of quick breaths can actually physiologically just reset the nervous system, and slow down that process. Because we go through this process called DPA, it's called diffuse physiological arousal, when we get super upset. And the catchphrase is called flooding. So we get flooded, And when we get emotionally flooded, this part of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, gets swollen and we are not able to think rationally. And that's what when we say things we don't mean, when we do things we regret. And we're human, so it happens. That's just life. It happens. But how do we kind of prevent these things? So I think that being compassionate to yourself and doing daily stretches, since we're at, a computer desk all day, and protecting our eyes and making sure that we're hydrated are all small ways, but they really add up. And, I have this last point, and I just want to maybe throw it out to you, Holly, if you want me to kind of go into this point about prioritizing safety and each other. I know that Teja is going to be talking about that a little bit, but just want to be mindful of time and everything. What are you feeling if I have it, if I should go into that now or table it?
I think we're fine. You go ahead and go for it. Yeah, I think we're fine on time.
Okay, great. Thank you. This one is the tricky one. It's definitely relevant to the current pandemic with the coronavirus. We're obviously in unprecedented times. And how do we ethically stay safe? Not for ourselves, but not only for ourselves, but for our loved ones, for our community, for our neighbors, for vulnerable populations. So I feel that it can be difficult when one person in a relationship is vigilant about safety and precautions and one person is not. So if one person is not, then really you're both at risk. And I'm conceptualizing people who live with each other as organisms. So, it's kind of like, how do you protect your organism? That's your family. So if your roommate or your partner or your lover are, maybe attending parties or events or doing other things, I'm not sure how much of that is happening still. But then that person could be bringing, the coronavirus back to the organism and impact and affect everyone involved who's residing together. So, ultimately we're all in this interesting position where we're all going to make our own ethical decisions. And hopefully through some good communication and expressing if there's any concern or anxiety or nervousness, then you can be able to have that kind of compromise and have some sort of negotiation and understanding and hopefully be on the same page. I do think things like wearing protective gear when going out, things like a face mask and gloves, I know that the CDC has suggested that as well. And, mindfully distancing from one another and regularly washing hands and clothes. These are all things that I think that are being introduced as kind of, I don't know if it's our new normal, but certainly for right now, they're being advised. And I think the main thing that I want to highlight here in terms of relationships is to be considerate of one another. Once again, coming back to that fact that, things like stress, anxiety, and depression, we're seeing it being heightened right now across the board, relationships, individuals, family systems, because I think it's scary. People don't really have answers. And when you don't have answers, all of those symptomologies can increase. So being respectful and mindful that, people might be experiencing waves of panic. They might be triggered by something they see on the news, and creating that space for your significant other or your partner or your family member to, in a safe and healthy way, experience those feelings with you as an anchor. I think that that's also really important in relationships, to be able to come to your person or people and be able to freak out, be able to vent. Listen, I had a really crazy day. I had this person on the so-and-so said this to me. That's what happens in relationships. It's that peer support structure, and it's also a romantic support structure. And in a time where we don't have a lot of those peer supports, people are falling back on their partner in more ways now in terms of that emotional bond and connection. So that leads me to the conclusion of this section. And really, I think all of it as well is to, in terms of prioritizing safety, is to check in with your partner regularly and ask them how they're doing, ask them how you can help. I think it takes multiple people in a relationship. It's not just one-sided. And while we are allowed to feel our feelings in relationships, there's also this consideration piece of being mindful of the other person and their experiences, because what they're feeling is valid as well. So in sum and in conclusion, I hope that all these little tips of choosing your battles and, normalizing this anxiety and stress, talking about housework, hopefully folks out there are able to take a little bit of that kind of healthy relationship kind of serum, if it were, or concoction, and hopefully that's able to do some magic on everyone's relationships, and also not only romantic relationships. I think this is all applicable stuff to people's family members as well, of really being mindful, courteous, and checking in with people we love during these times. Right, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Priya. That was great. So Teja, I think we're transitioning over to your section now.
Yes, absolutely. Just want to say I really appreciate all of your insight, Priya. That was you hit on some really good topics there. And I really want to highlight that piece that you were talking about giving yourself some grace right now and giving yourself a little bit of freedom to make mistakes. Because this is, like you were saying, it's a really stressful time. And we've never really had to deal with anything like this before. So nobody's going to be perfect in this time, and just kind of giving yourself a little bit of grace, I think is really important right now. So thanks for highlighting all of those things. And as always, it was very eloquent and beautiful.
Well, thank you.
So nice work.
Reflection.
Yeah, so a little bit about what I wanted to talk about today is to kind of piggyback off of what Priya was sharing and talk a little bit more in depth about dating in the time of COVID and what that looks like. So what that looks like in folks that are exploring new relationships and looking to meet people, and then also folks who are in maybe ongoing relationships and kind of seeing how we can navigate that with COVID. In terms of dating and kind of meeting some new folks, this is really unprecedented. Like Priya was saying, it's a time that we've never really had to deal with. And there's a lot of social constructions and social norms around dating. We date in certain ways, and there's certain things that we do. And all of those social norms have kind of been overturned, and we're having to look at all of these norms in a different way. So kind of just like giving yourself some grace and kind of noticing how we can navigate some of those things. One of the things I wanted to check in about a little bit is using dating apps to date. I think this is much more common now than it was before COVID, just because it's really hard to meet folks when you're isolated at home, and meeting people on the internet is much easier. And it's a positive way to get some social connection right now, and a lot of people are exploring that. With using these dating apps, we've noticed that there's a lot of conflict that comes out of this, and a lot of different social norms that are kind of needing to be reevaluated and reassessed. So I think what it entails is taking a lot of time to kind of think about what your needs are for yourself, what your values are, and kind of what you're looking for, and having a lot of open, honest communication with yourself about what you need to feel safe at this time and what you need to kind of feel like you're getting your needs met. With dating apps and with dating in general, there's this kind of idea that we need to keep this momentum going. So you meet someone, you start talking with someone, maybe you set up a date and kind of see where it goes from there. In order to keep this momentum going, it's a little bit more challenging if maybe it's harder to meet people in person and so forth. So I think just having really open communication with yourself, and then also with the people that you're meeting, kind of seeing where they're at. If they just want to have maybe conversations online, maybe a first date on Zoom or something like that. And then if that relationship is kind of progressing, what that might look like, and having that open communication around maybe if you're meeting in person, what that in-person meeting will look like. So is that going for a walk with this person for a first date? Is that going for a picnic outside? Having a conversation around where they're at in terms of social distancing and their preferences. Do they want to continue to be 6 feet apart? And then kind of having that communication around what that looks like. And then I think another thing, Priya spoke to this a little bit, but kind of navigating, if you are an organism and the people around you are an organism, then if you're bringing someone into your apartment, kind of checking in, if you have roommates, kind of checking in with your roommates about what they're comfortable with. If you're dating someone, bringing that person into your organism will not just affect you and not affect them, it'll affect your roommates and then maybe whoever your roommates are involved with. So kind of putting some thought into that, checking in with your roommates, checking in with the different people in your life, maybe your family, if you live with your family, and just seeing what everybody's comfortable with and kind of moving forward from there. So yeah, like a lot of just nuance and a lot of conflict can arise from that, and a lot of it can be mitigated with just a little bit of open communication around that. Another thing that is really interesting right now is, like I was alluding to earlier, kind of setting up some of those virtual first dates. It's a really interesting concept, and there's ways to do it that are complete disasters, and there's ways to do it that kind of make it a little more fun and still feel like a good first date. So kind of putting some thought into it, putting some intention into it, maybe setting it up similar to a regular first date out in the community, and keep it casual, maybe getting dressed up a little bit, wearing a nice shirt, making sure that you're wearing pants, all of these things that you want to make sure that like you're not making a fool of yourself on your first date, looking into your background and making sure that you're presenting yourself in a way that seems like a nice way to present yourself when you're meeting for someone for the first time. This is going to be their first glimpse into your home, so kind of presenting yourself in that way that you want to present yourself. And then kind of just finding a way to keep it fun. Maybe you're playing a game together. Maybe if you're over 21, having a drink together. Maybe you made dinner separately and you're eating dinner together. Kind of doing something to keep it fun, keep the conversation going. And then giving yourself some grace because it might be awkward. It's kind of a weird thing to have a date on Zoom. So it might be awkward at first, and kind of just rolling with it and seeing how it goes. And then kind of maybe continuing that process to see how it goes, and then keeping it fun and engaging. Another thing that I wanted to check in about is those relationships that have been ongoing for a while. Maybe you started a relationship a few months before COVID and you were dating, and then COVID happened, and you're kind of trying to navigate if you should see that person, if you are just going to start texting with that person and doing Zoom calls or FaceTime. And then kind of having that open conversation with your partner about what that might look like. And then Priya alluded to this a little bit as well, but there's a lot more conflict that arises in relationships because of COVID. A lot of those problems that may have existed before are kind of exacerbated by the stressors that we're all living in. We're all under a lot of pressure. So a lot of times we see with the couples that we work with that some of those pressures just get heightened. We're all under a lot of pressure and they kind of just get exacerbated. There's some situations that are kind of the inverse of that. So we see that maybe there was a lack of quality time together or a lack of connection. And this time together, being close together, has actually solved some of those problems. So you can really have both sides. I think that really thinking about how conflict is a normal part of a relationship is helpful. Every relationship is going to have fights. It's going to have arguments. That is a totally normal thing, and it's going to happen. So it's a little bit less about if you fight, but how you fight. And thinking about during COVID and during social isolation, we're all a little bit more tense. So one good tip that we can offer is spending a little bit more time just listening and taking a back seat. We all have a lot of problems that are really unsolvable right now. We have a lot of stressors that are completely out of our hands. So really thinking about how you can support your partner just by listening. And maybe this is not the time to, kind of, as Priya said, make your point or get your point across. Maybe this is a better time to just kind of take a back seat and just listen to your partner. And I know that's a really hard thing to do, and it's much easier said than done, but maybe just practicing a little bit here and there. There are those big conversations that do still need to happen, and maybe just kind of finding a time and a place that you can have those kind of bigger conversations. So maybe planning for maybe a walk or after dinner, or a time that you can kind of just sit together and have some of those bigger conversations and help support your partner through that. One thing that is really important right now is keeping engaging activities such as date nights or something like that. We can really get into this routine of just doing the same thing, and you're around your partner all the time if you live with your partner or if your partner's coming over. So kind of setting up a special time that's just a date night. And this is a time that you can break your routine. Maybe if you usually eat dinner in the living room, maybe dressing up a little bit and eating dinner outside, or eating dinner at the kitchen table. And just kind of switching things up and having something that's fun and intentional and kind of meaningful for you all. I think that can be really helpful sometimes. Priya spoke to this a little bit as well, but I kind of want to just re-highlight it, because with partners at this time, if you're spending a lot of time with that person, they can really tend to become your whole world. They can become your everything. It can become your social connection and your support and your interaction and kind of all the different things that you used to get from different outlets. Your partner can now become that person, and it builds a lot of extra stress on the relationship. So kind of thinking about if there's any other ways you can get that outlet, whether it's FaceTiming with your family or a friend, or maybe spending your own time going for a run or doing something outside. Just have a little bit of time separate so that you can come back together and be stronger together. Then I guess the last thing that I kind of wanted to check in about was long distance relationships. There's a lot of times there's not going to be huge changes to long distance relationships, but it is often the case that you are on different pages than your partner if you're in a long distance relationship. Maybe you're in a place where you have family or roommates or people that you live with that you can get that social connection from. And maybe your partner is more isolated than you, or having more of a difficult time without social connection, or maybe they're in a city that is much harder hit by COVID. So finding ways that you can help support your partner. This is maybe listening to what's going on with your partner, kind of thinking about what your partner is going through, and just thinking that, maybe they might not be in the same place as you are. Priya, I wanted to ask if you had anything that you think that we could add to that relationship piece.
Yeah, super great points. I think that in consideration with the long distance relationships, I'm thinking that, a lot of this, to anyone who might be watching this later and tuning in, that a lot of this might not feel like it's applicable to them, because maybe their homeostasis is the same. They're still apart. So social distancing, it's kind of irrelevant maybe in a long distance relationship. Maybe they've already been doing watching movies on Zoom at the same time, or eating dinner at the same time. I actually know quite a few people who watch Netflix at the same time on different coasts. So there are these sweet and fun little creative ways to kind of adjust from that dominant expectation where you have a partner and you eventually move in, live with them, marry them, whatever that kind of social construct might be. Like we were both discussing that, relationships look so differently. So if you're currently in a long distance relationship, you might not feel like it's applicable. And I'm wondering about the environmental stressors. So many people around you, if you're in a long distance relationship, may be impacted and affected. And maybe you actually feel like some FOMO, that you're missing out on something that, maybe it's totally the opposite. Maybe people are doing really well because they already have these resources and support structures in their normal relationship, in their normal routine. So I think that even with talks like this, it's easy to, and I did this myself, but like listing all the things that could be difficult and how to address them. And what I really appreciate that you mentioned, Teja, was that we are seeing the inverse of it, and kind of that second order of change of maybe couples who weren't able to spend quality time because of, you know, scheduling conflicts or employment or different things, or having to commute. So it can really be beneficial for relationships too. I think it takes the extra effort to kind of find those positives, even writing a list of gratitudes and things that are nice, like being able to get a snack from our kitchen, or not needing to drive home or get stuck in traffic. So kind of focusing on the things that, even though we might not want this forever, hey, here are some of the ways that we can make this work, and think positively as well. But I think you did a great job, Teja, and really spoke eloquently to all those nuances of dating and how difficult it might be right now. And I really appreciate your comments about wearing the pants. I think we all laughed here. And I also think it's really important to, as therapists, we've gotten a lot of house tours lately. And maybe we've seen some things that we maybe wouldn't have seen normally. And I think that with dating, even in calling a friend randomly and things like that, making sure that your presentation is good. So if you're having a date, your date might ask you, show me around your house. What does it look like? And if it's really messy, you might want to think about those small things and kind of keep some semblance of normalcy. So if you were bringing someone over after knowing them for some time, or not at all, whatever cup of tea is your flavor, and bring them home, kind of prepare as if you were going to be meeting them in real life. So kind of keeping those standards for yourself of whatever is congruent for you. If you're the type of person who's like, no, I'm fine. I don't care if my laundry's out. That's totally fine. Just making sure that you're kind of keeping those, what's good for you, because that's really what matters. And ultimately in dating, you want someone who's going to accept you for you, and value you for you authentically. And I think that that's really important. Great. Well, I think that's all I got. Teja, back to you, or anyone else, or.
So if we're finished with the presentation piece, Priya and Teja, thank you so much. That was wonderful. We do have some questions for you if you're open to answering some questions. So there are just a couple things that we kind of put together. The first one, if you live with your partner, what are some ways that you can give each other some space? And especially if you have kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it comes up a lot, especially if you have kids. So I could speak to that for a second, and then Priya, if you have anything to add, that would be great as well. I think that it can be really, really challenging, especially if you live in a small apartment or a small home, and especially if you have kids. So really finding something that you can do that is your own time. So maybe that is reading the newspaper, or going for a run, or doing an art project, or even just doing your work in your own corner of the living room. Just kind of finding, maybe it's 30 minutes, maybe it's 10 minutes, just finding a little bit of time to focus on yourself for a minute. And if you have kids, that can be a little bit more challenging. So kind of setting them up with some kind of activity, maybe it's an art project or something like that, just so you have 5 minutes to kind of just take a deep breath and maybe focus on something that you need to get done. Maybe it's a to-do list item, maybe it's some housework or something like that. Priya, do you have anything to add to that?
Wow, I love that answer. I think that pretty much touched on everything I would say. Um, Rattling my brain here for other tips. My only add would be feeling empowered to ask your partner for help and that you need a break. I think time is a luxury for a lot of parents that doesn't exist. And keeping in mind that a lot of parents are struggling with homeschooling or really kind of like the lack thereof right now. And I think that our education system is struggling. Teachers are really working hard trying to, adjust curriculum, and it's difficult to keep children's attention regardless, let alone electronically. And I'm seeing a lot of parents step up and now fill in the role of kind of formal educators. So it's challenging, especially if parents are working as well and trying to have Zoom meetings and trying to sustain that, and assessing the privilege in that even if both parents, thinking of maybe a more traditional family lens here, if both parents are able to still have jobs and bring in income, which is such a wonderful thing and a privilege, and how that's still difficult if you have children who would normally be in school or childcare or daycare. So feeling empowered to express that to your partner and ask for help so that you can draw a bath, read a book, go to sleep early, make a smoothie, the things that maybe you don't want to be crawled on for 10 minutes. Maybe you don't want your hair being pulled on. Maybe you don't want your earrings being pulled on. I think it depends on how old your children are and what they're like. But, those are ways that we can, that I think parents can center themselves a little bit. And also, it doesn't need to be an hour. It doesn't need to be 30 minutes. Heck, even 3 minutes is great. I think just trying to have a little bit of time can go a long way.
Great, thank you. That's an awesome answer. Both of those are. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have a couple more questions. So kind of switching gears to think about if you're living separately and you and your partner disagree about how much time you should spend together remotely. How do you address that argument? How do you even start?
Teja, I'll let you start.
I think that's a really tricky one. And I think that it takes a lot of open communication about what each of your needs are for kind of interaction and what your needs are for engagement in the relationship. So I think it just starts with hearing each other's perspectives on what their needs are. And I think that it's going to be often the case that not everybody's needs are going to be met. So really trying to get as close as possible to supporting your partner. I think that these are, as we've talked about a lot, really challenging times. So really trying to take that into account and giving yourself some grace in that as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think, something that I just recently did in my practice with a couple is I had each of them write out a list of things that they like to do and things that they want to do. And these were individual lists. And then coming together and kind of comparing and contrasting these lists. Okay, what are the things that you can each do individually? And what are the things that you can do collaboratively? And kind of, I think that could be a really great activity for couples to do, people in relationships to do, to see where it is that they can get, their joy and their social needs met. I think it's really, critical, and I think it's very meaningful to have individual hobbies, interests, passions, and people. So making sure that there's space and some balance in this strange time, and then also coming back to that grace that it might be imbalanced, that maybe that's where the argument is coming from, that one person wants to spend more time with the other, but kind of just being like a little bit graceful with each other and trying to reset through that gentle and honest and direct communication. Direct communication does not need to be harsh. It can be very compassionate, very warm. And I think that when it's delivered in a warm and gentle way, it's received much, much better, more openly.
Thank you. Okay, we have a few more minutes and I want to try to get 2 more questions in. So the first is, you kind of talked about this, Priya, a little bit. You can't really go to the gym, you can't go shoot hoops with your friends, you can't go to church, you can't, do the normal things that you would do to try to blow off some steam. What are some ways that you can, recommend to people to blow off some steam when there's conflict in their relationship?
Mm-hmm. Fantastic question. Thank you so much. I think that really diving into and taking a nice long look at what it is that you truly like doing and that you truly want. Kind of like that list intervention I was just talking about. Really, it comes down to knowing yourself and finding those hobbies, picking up a new hobby. If, drawing, painting, journaling, getting some sort of physical activity is important, even if that's the walk, being outside in nature, if it's your front yard or on some steps. I think changing the environment is very important when you're in active conflict. And when maybe you can't get a lot of space, right? That how do I blow off steam? Changing the environment can really help to reset yourself. Music, podcasts, taking a shower, taking a bath, masturbating, whatever it is. But these are all ways that people can cope. And that's okay. So getting a little bit more creative, because we don't have these easy, I'm going to go to the gym. It's like, okay, well, first of all, do you really want to go to the gym? Or, but yeah, you can go out with your friends, or, I think that even tapping into your friends via FaceTime or social media, giving them a call, giving someone a call, reaching out to an old friend, can be really helpful, and it can kind of take your mind off of things a little bit until you're cooled down, de-escalated, so you can come back in, and maybe re-engage in that conversation in a better headspace. And then also giving yourself permission to feel how you feel, to not feel shame around that, to not feel guilty for maybe being mad or being upset or frustrated. You're allowed, honoring yourself, and then trying to kind of course correct, and communicate that with your partner, that, hey, maybe that wasn't the best, that's not what I want, and how can we do X, Y, and Z to make it better?
Teja, do you have anything to add?
I think that's perfect. I think it covered all of it. And I'm seeing that we are running close to time, so I'm ready for the next question as well.
Okay, I just want to say you're suggesting showers and wearing pants, and I'm feeling very attacked. Okay, so the last question. Some fun activities that you can do with your partner to keep your relationship strong during this time. I mean, there's the normal stuff that you could do during normal times, but what are some things that might be specific to this time?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can start out with this one. I think that it's really helpful in some senses to have a routine, but also to do things that break that routine. So setting up, like I was talking about earlier, setting up like a fun date night or something like that, that kind of breaks that routine. And then also maybe like learning some new hobby with your friend, or playing some new game with your friend or your partner. And kind of just engaging in a new activity that kind of breaks that pattern and that cycle. So maybe you have been talking about wanting to cook together for a really long time. So maybe kind of getting a cookbook and pulling out some of those recipes and again, kind of trying them on together. And that can be a really fun way to connect and to kind of engage a little bit more in an activity that's fun and it's engaging. And it's a really good way to strengthen that relationship. In addition to that, maybe you all have wanted to try maybe doing some art or some pottery or something like that. And I know there's limited resources, but kind of finding something that is an outlet that you can do together that would be really fun and engaging to do.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. And I would tack on getting takeout, you know, that seems simple, but it feels really special these days. I don't know if all of you felt that way. It really feels like an extra treat. And you know, maybe looking up on YouTube some free painting tutorials. Bob Ross has so many, and that's so great. Meditation together. You know, I kind of have been thinking, and only very recently making this analogy that experiencing COVID, you know, I think that people are kind of now starting to settle down a little bit in terms of global kind of anxiety and stressors. And it's kind of like that same feeling of when the lights go out, when the electricity goes out in either winter or any other month, and you kind of make a fire and you find the candles and you find the board games and you make some food and you kind of congregate as a house or a home with, you know, either your partner or your family maybe growing up. And those are the memories that often have a lot of warmth to them. And wow, that night was so much fun, or oh, that was so special. And how can we kind of take that sentiment and recreate it here? So I really like the idea, Teja, of, you know, learning a new game. Maybe it's chess, maybe it's Monopoly, you know, maybe it's playing an online game. So I think that there are a lot of different ways that people can get creative, and maybe it's a pie making competition with all your friends, and posting the coolest picture. I mean, there's a lot of different things that people can do. And I think that we can all do our small part, and then, you know, kind of share that with everyone and share those positive thoughts and do our best.
That's great. That's a happy note to end things on. So I think we'll leave it there. Priya and Teja, thank you so much for your time tonight. This was really informative.
Yeah,
Great.
thank you so much for having us. It was really, really a great experience. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Maya, for all your social media work. And major shout out. Thank you so much, Holly, from the beginning of really reaching out to our program. So I'm glad that we were able to share some insights, hopefully some new revelations or new tips. So.
Oh boy, I'm going to go wash the sheets right now.